Alrighty. Oh, and I should probably share my screen. All right. Real quick, can everybody view this? Should say writing effective write-ups.
I can see it.
Perfect. Alrighty.
I can see it.
Excellent. Here we go. All right. So going over the beginning, what is a write-up? When you are entering something in a cultural competition, it is best to have a small description of that item that you are entering. It's designed to give the judges a better understanding of the piece, materials that are used, techniques that are used, any important information related to it. Write ups, and I've got it bolded there for you. Write ups often include the cultural category, the item that will be judged, or sorry, cultural category the item will be judged in, the title of the piece, and a brief description of it. Um,
I was going
so,
to add something to that slide there.
yeah, absolutely,
Um,
go for it.
Write-ups kind of vary wildly based on what category they're going to be in, and what information you're going to want to be including is very dependent on category. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. That should go on that would go in this kind of area. It's kind of you're tailoring your write-ups to the category and the entry that you're working with. So they do vary quite a bit entry to entry.
Oh, yeah. For example, a bardic write up is going to look very different from a cooking write up, which will look different from a garb write up. So, yeah, you're definitely going to need to tailor it to the specific category that you're entering. Thank you, Kite. Also, Kite and Irene, feel free to jump in at any point, because it's harder for me to like since I'm sharing the screen, harder for me to see if when you guys want to add to it. So, all right, some things to include in a write up. Any materials or ingredients you are using in a piece. This is especially important if you are doing any sort of food or alcohol, anything that's going to be consumed. We need to know if what what ingredients are in there for allergies, for example. But same thing with any entry. So, like if I was doing a garb piece, I would want to include what kind of material I'm using. Am I using cotton? Am I using linen? Am I using some sort of synthetic material? You can even be as detailed as what kind of thread type you're using. It doesn't have to necessarily go that detailed, but we want to know what the item is made out of. If you have any sort of historical importance, um, it could be whether it's to the recipe, a song's origin, the style of the piece. Um, so if you are entering, again, I'm going to throw out a lot of garb examples just because I do a lot of garb work. But if I'm recreating an outfit from like the 1850s, I would want to include that information in my write up, especially if I'm using the same techniques that were used during that time, or if I ended up creating it on the same machine, or if I was hand sewing it. You want to include any of that historical importance. And then areas that you put in extra effort. So, show off places you want the judges to focus on. And again, an example would be the type of seams used on a garment. Um, like I said, gonna use a lot of garment option or examples. So, um, I might say that I'm using flat felled seams on a pair of pants because those are really sturdy seam, or that's a very sturdy type of seam, and you want to use it on areas of high stress. Not every judge would necessarily look for that or know that information, so you want to give them that little extra effort.
The kind of old term from Iron Mountains was lemur points, and the example she gave was, did you fly to Madagascar and shave a lemur and use its fur in your entry? But like that's stuff that we wouldn't know as a judge looking at it. Like if you spun your own yarn for a fiber arts entry and then knit it, like we wouldn't necessarily know by looking at it versus a purchased yarn, and that's stuff that's like super important to entries. That we wouldn't know just by looking at it, the extra effort or the extra like steps you did to it that would vary from a more simple approach that should be taken into account for judging.
Absolutely. Going off of that too, a cooking example. Um, as I've used in the past, if you went to Walmart and bought a pre-made cake and then you decorated the top, versus if you bought a box mix and then you made that box mix and then decorated it, versus if you um, made a recipe from scratch that your mom gave you, and or if you made a recipe from scratch that you made. So the more effort you are putting into an item, we want to know that, because that will affect how we score that piece. A couple other ones that didn't fit on the other one. Information you think a judge might have questions about. So if you digitize something, did you do the tooling? Did you stain the paper for a scroll? Kind of going back to that previous one, any information that you can include that the judges might not know about that you think they should know about, anything you think they might ask questions about, you want to include that. And then another good one that Kite had mentioned when we were kind of discussing this class beforehand was motivations and purposes of the piece, if it's not apparent.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my headphones had dropped contact. Something on the previous one about ingredients. I have been asked before about people who are a little more secretive about their ingredients, their recipe. And I would like to say you don't necessarily have to include your recipe if it is like, family secret recipe. We just need to know what's in it, not the proportions. We don't really care as much about the proportions so much as, does it have mint? Does it have rum? Does it have, these things that people might be allergic to, as opposed to how much is in it?
Excellent. Anything else before I continue? All right. So those were a lot of the do's. Those are the things that we want to include in a write-up. Here are some of the don'ts, things to avoid. And unfortunately, we see this a lot. So the first one is mistakes. Mistakes will happen. It is impossible to make a piece, or nearly impossible at least, to make a piece without having some sort of error or something that you can improve upon. Don't point it out. don't and also don't try to play it off as though it was intentional. I've seen that a handful of times before too, where maybe your child bumped you while you were painting and you smeared paint across the top. Don't say that was intentionally added to the piece for whatever reason. Like, mistakes happen. Try not to bring attention to them, and try not to play them off as though it were intentional, because usually we can tell, and it doesn't really help. Another one, don't say it's your first time doing something. When you're entering a piece, you're entering it into a competition. You are entering it so you recognize it as good enough to stand on its own. If you don't feel like it is good enough to enter because it's your first time, then you might want to use that as a learning experience before you enter something else. Also, don't compare your
Or just understand that it's might not like score super highly, but it's fine to enter things that you've entered as a first try and see how it does and like get feedback and stuff on it. That's perfectly acceptable. We love that stuff. But yeah, it's you don't we can usually we know like what kind of talent level is going to a piece, and if you fool us, then good on ya. Same thing with the first thing. Like, if it's kind of the judge's job to look for mistakes and find those things, and if we miss them, that's, I mean, our bad.
Exactly. Yeah. If it is your first time entering something, or even if it's your 100th time doing something and you're entering it, and you just like your main goal is to get feedback and see ways that you can improve, like, I want you to enter things. I love seeing people's work at every point of their progress in that skill. So don't feel bad about entering something for your first time or second time or whatever. But yeah, you definitely don't have to tell us. Um, don't compare your work to others. Um, don't tell this one. This one can be kind of tricky too. Don't tell a lengthy step-by-step guide of creation. I'm somewhat torn on this one myself, because I think it is important to show how something is made, especially if it's something that might be not well known by the judges. But at the same time, if it's a super lengthy, like 6, 7, 10 page long write up, it can be very difficult to get through the whole thing. And usually it's a lot of extra information that we don't need.
Yeah, I think it really depends on how common the craft is. And if you can show a picture diary of how you did it, we're way more likely to get through the whole thing to be like, oh yeah, I see the steps there. That's cool. Okay, I see how you went from here to here to here all along the way, and that is usually a lot faster to get through as a judge.
Mm-hmm. But like if I'm entering a belt favor, it involves a handful of straight stitches and maybe a little applique, and I shouldn't really be giving you a 5-page step by step on that. The item itself, just by looking at it, explains essentially the process without me having to say it. And then that last one down there, don't include phrases like, I think this turned out really well. Um, though that information, like, that's another one where I appreciate that you think it turned out well, um, but that information is unnecessary for the judges. It doesn't add anything to the write up, it just makes your write up longer. So anything that's like, this was my first time, but I really did a good job with it, and I think that you guys are going to love it. Like, none of that information is necessary. That's personal opinion. With a write up, we want the facts. We want like information that is relevant to the piece. Right,
I've got another weird one on that avoid one potentially. So this is kind of one that stuck out. I was judging at Keep a few years ago, and there was entries that this person had entered in mundane competitions and had like this list of accomplishments of like this one best in show at the whatever county fair and stuff. And it was like, I'm torn whether that's like neat or not.
I would, and every judge is going to be a little different on what they do and do not like seeing in a write up. Personally, I feel like that information isn't relevant to the current competition, because the people that were judging it in a different environment and may have different criteria. The competition might have been very different as well, and so I wouldn't need that information in a write up. Right. Kite was super awesome and has a handful of examples that I wanted to show you. And then, Kite, if you would like to talk through them a little bit, that would be really helpful.
Just want me to read through this one?
Yeah, if you want to read through it, or if you just want to like explain kind of what, like, how you feel about the write up, anything that, like, any of the good do's, any of the not so great don'ts.
Oh yeah. Yes, this is for a Wings of Dawn tunic that this is from a previous judging entry. I was kind of looking for like good examples and bad examples, but I couldn't really find ones that like were like astoundingly bad or astoundingly good. They all had kind of their good and bad parts. So this one I think is a decent enough write up. This is fine. I'll read through it. It's a concept. A member of my park requested that I sew him a company tunic, and although I do not have a great deal of Garber experience, I agreed. The design was created by Loxius for the Wings of the Dawn and is not my concept. Process. This was my first time working with linen, so I started by asking other Garbers for tips on working with linen. Once I was really sure I wouldn't completely botch it, I borrowed a tunic from my intended victim, client, and traced it onto a large sheet of paper. My reasoning was that the tunic already fit him well. For sure, it would be easier than taking his measurements and trying to create a pattern from scratch. Once I had the outline, I dripped the necessary lines onto my big sheet of paper so that it looked as close as I could get it to the design I was given. I meticulously labeled every single piece so that I wouldn't get them mixed up, and cut them out and traced them individually onto a separate piece of paper, using a ruler to add seam allowances around every piece, and again labeling everything. Once I had the many pattern pieces, I pinned them and cut the linen, then began the long process of assembling the tunic. As I was warned that linen frays, I flat-filled every seam, every single one. I sewed the appliques on as soon as I was able to, as I did not want to add them to the tunic once it was completely finished. Each applique piece was satin stitched on using a thin stitch, then again using a wider stitch to give the outlines a better look. I used a similar system of satin stitching twice to stitch the Roman numerals onto the sleeve. I hate this tunic ever so much because it stressed me out and there was many seams to flat fill, and I don't like deadlines, but I'm rather proud of the finished product, especially the most perfectly matched seams I have ever sewn. And the friend who asked me to sew it likes it, so I'm happy. So yeah, there's several of the do's and don'ts in here. I think that this is a very good like process section and concept section, especially those first bits. There's some of those don'ts, especially towards the end, where like I hate this tunic ever so much. Like, don't tell that to judges.
I am proud of the finished product, especially, I mean, that part, but like, the friend who asked me to sew it likes it, so I'm happy. Not necessarily information that I would feel is necessary for a write-up.
The how they copied their pattern and that they're working with emulating an existing design and stuff, like, and crediting those correctly, I think are both very good, like, solid parts, and I think that their process is sufficient for me to be able to walk through this tunic pretty easily.
I also think it's important that you included that it was not your concept, and also, like, perhaps that it's not your color choice, that maybe you would have done something different, but, in your particular one, that part's out of your hands and you're working with a design that's not your design, so this is what you're working with.
Yes, I've definitely entered a handful of items where it's like the customer chose the colors, the customer chose the design. It's not my favorite, but it looks exactly like they wanted it. All right, let me grab the second one. So this one has pictures and is a little lengthier. It is 7 pages.
Pictures.
I do love the addition of the pictures. I will run through this a little bit slower too, and of course the PowerPoint will be available after the class for people to take a peek at it too. But yeah, oh my gosh, Kite, would you like to talk about this one a little bit?
Sure thing. Yeah. So this one is very long, and it has a lot of like very detailed pictures. To this write-up's credit, it was an entry for an online competition, so they had to go a little bit harder. But if this was, I would say that this is way more than necessary for judging. I know some kingdoms really like showing what award people are at. I don't usually take that into account when I'm judging. I'd try to guess. I'd rather be guessing at what level this is at, and then if, like, you'd be able to push for that, kind of levy that award as the runner of the competition or the regent, as like, oh no, this is like 4th or 5th level work, as opposed to like, ah, yes, I am at a 3. I do like pictures. This one has a lot of pictures. So it goes, summary, the pumpkin doublet is a lined garment made from upcycled cotton bed sheets. The garment has Land Connect sleeves, I think that's how you pronounce that, with wings at the shoulders. The garment is closed with green cord lacing at the front, and at each of the gauntlets, the green cord is capped with gold-covered rings and brown embroidery floss to recall pumpkin vines. The body of the garment includes several applique pumpkin leaves made from the same fabric as the lining and features embroidered pumpkin vines. Finally, the heraldry for Stanley the Daft is embroidered over a pumpkin leaf that lies over the wearer's heart. A lengthy list of tools and techniques here.
I do like the addition of the techniques included on this.
Yeah. The summary is really good too.
Yeah, great summary. And actually, like, if you were entering this in a competition, I'm just gonna go back there real quick. If you were entering this in a Dragon Master or an ANS competition, I would honestly just stick with that.
Yep, this page.
This page. Like, the tools, techniques, summary, done. This is all you need. But then again, as you mentioned, this was online, so they had to give you a lot more pictures, and they do go through the phases of work, but for a lot of people, especially if you are a garber, you already understand a lot of the phases of work, you understand the process of it, and you don't really need to go through that step by step. I think for this one, we probably don't have to read through all of it.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you wanted to add to this one before we move on to the next one?
Um, I'm looking through it here too, and I've got a boy bouncing off the walls.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's a lot of like very detailed step by step that we that I don't usually I don't know I don't like going through all of that because I want to see how you did it and like question it and be like, oh, they did really good at this.
Mm-hmm.
Like mysterious.
Yeah. And again, like for most of us, if you have access to the item, you can look at it, you can typically see what they did and how they did it. Um, for online work, I can see needing the extra part. But yes, if you were to just do this page with the summary, the tools and techniques, you're giving us the materials, you're giving us um, the basics on how you did it and the techniques you're using. So I would call this good. And then the last one, fitted tunic tutorial. And this is just one page.
Yeah, I'll read through this one here quick. Um, I think y'all know who did this one. This is from Lady Armstrong here. So, this tutorial was written with the new to intermediate Garber in mind. It is this some of that like include your motivation, which is one of the do's. It is intended to help people who are relatively unfamiliar with sewing obtain measurements, make a fitted pattern, and cut and construct a tunic with faced trim and simple applique. Many tutorials cover one or more of, or one or some of these things, but this tutorial aims to include all of them in one place in an easy to understand format. The tutorial was created as part of Sir Kinder Penumbra's low-cost tunic competition, where the challenge was to create the best tunic possible for under $5 and under $10. I covered how to make a $5 tunic and then proceeded to show how a few more dollars and a little more time could really improve the overall appearance for a tunic. This tutorial won the competition for best tutorial, and the tunic itself won the under $10 portion of the competition. The tutorial was entered at Polaris' first Dragon Master in November 2016. I've recently removed some of the information specific to the low-cost tunic competition from the tutorial in order to make it more streamlined and clarified, and added to the remaining information and images. The tutorial took approximately 50 hours to create, from the sewing itself to the photography to the photo editing to the writing and the arrangement of the final product, followed by several hours worth of additional editing. The tutorial was created using Google Slides, using a preset format which I adjusted to the needs of the project. Feedback on this tutorial has been tremendous so far, and I've been contacted by numerous people who said they found the tutorial easy to follow and that they were very happy with the results in terms of fit, aesthetic, and durability. Any project which improves not only the look of the game but also people's experience within the project, within it, is a project well worth doing and represents a challenge which I am glad to have taken part in. Thank you for your time. Yeah, I think this is a very, very solid write-up for this entry. Like this is a really good write-up.
Nyreen, did you have any feedback on this one too?
I know the one that this is referring to, and it does sum it up very well. This is it does summarize exactly what she's doing, why she did it, and yeah, it's a good one.
The story aspect is, and the
Right.
stuff we wouldn't know just by reading the writing entry, like the story behind it and some of the stuff that went into it, I think is also really important for judging. That's all stuff that's really neat.
Especially since some of that stuff used to be included in the tutorial and she took it out. Like originally it had a lot of that information about here's how to do these things on the cheap, and some of it is still in there, but it's lost some of its like history in the tutorial itself, and it's kind of neat seeing it and like here's how it started out, but that having that in her write-up is an interesting way to include the like here's how it started out and how I've modified it and how it's come to its final form, and so you can see some of the love and attention that's gone into the revisions going into it without having to read it in its original form and then its next form. Like she doesn't have to include all the copies as she's revised it.
Excellent. Awesome. Alrighty. And I believe that was my last slide. That's the last slide. I'm going to close this down and stop sharing my screen, but again, continuing to record. And I would like to open things up for any sort of questions people might have. Let's see. Oh,
Definitely get people to like pre-read your stuff and prejudge your entries. Like not the judges themselves, but like your friends or your local regent or whatever. Just yeah, run through them and see if there's anything that you can adjust or like fix on your write-up, because you can do all that. Get friends to help.
On times when I've not been entering or judging, I've had friends say, "Hey, are you entering or judging the next Dragon Master?" And then like, "Can I ask you for feedback on my entries?" And that's perfectly acceptable. Like, find your local Serpent Knight or Master or whatever and ask them. Like, that's part of our culture. Like, we should be fostering the arts. So if you have a Master or a Serpent Knight or whatever at your local park, or somebody you feel comfortable enough with, message them and ask them if they're entering and if they would be willing to look over your stuff and give any suggestions. If you already have your write-ups available, that you could ask them, send them pictures, just see what their feedback is. If they have any things that they say you could improve, maybe give them a rundown of how you plan on presenting. I know presenting is a different class we plan on putting out, but like just kind of have a conversation with them, because that is obviously they've gone through that. Like, they've gone through that whole competition-y mindset. Most of them, not everyone came up through the competition thing, but like most of us have. And so if we're not entering and we're not compromised judging wise, most of us are perfectly willing to have that conversation with anyone who asks. So just ask.
I see we have a few people with questions. Ember, would you like to go first? I'm not hearing you.
In the meantime, I have a quick story.
Yeah, go for it.
So I was judging out in Northern Lights this last March, and there was this lady with this cloak in, and I mean it was a fairly basic looking cloak and everything. Like it was well constructed and everything, but it would have scored fairly, like, I don't know, like a high 3, low 4. But something that was not in her write up and we did not notice until a little bit after is that she like meticulously like lined up the patterns of the fabric across like every piece, and like played with them and made sure all the patterns of the fabric were like exactly correct across this whole thing, which is a massive undertaking and a huge shift in how the construction of that piece worked out, which vastly increased the score. Please add that stuff in your write up if you put that much effort into things.
All right, Ember, give it a shot. Uh,
I think it's read. Yep, there we go.
we got
Hey,
it.
there you go. Yeah.
For some reason. So a lot of the categories stuff that we've been talking about so far have been like where you have an item that you're presenting. But I believe it's been a while since I looked at the cultural categories, that like Bardic and stuff like that is also a category.
It sure is.
Yep, I have the categories here like handy. It's fine art, culinary, writing, construction, garb, fiber arts, bardic, and regent's choice are the ones that are listed in the corpora. Yeah, we discussed, we had a bardic in our chat up front of this, and it's like, how do we write up bardics? And I don't know, personally I prefer the like more of a verbal presentation before you start. But sometimes there is like placeholder writings or like stuff that we would like to know, like where the piece is from and who composed it and stuff like that.
I think Bardic should at least have a little bit of an introduction, just so the judges aren't going around being like, is the Bardic piece here? Is there going to be a Bardic? So at least if you have a thing saying, I'm doing a Bardic, it's a oral presentation of a poem, blah, blah, blah. Like, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can just be like, I'm doing this Bardic piece. You know, that's all you really need to say about it. It doesn't have to be much more than that, other than like maybe where it originates from or whatever. But you're going to present most of it to the judges live. Your written write-up for Bardics is mostly just to let the judges know that that's a placeholder for it.
Yeah, we usually appreciate having multiple copies when we're doing that too, just so we don't have to like share the one.
Yes, I was going to say with Bardics, depending on what it is, typically if you have a copy of the poem or the song, if it has an origin, like from a musical or from like a historical importance of some sort, if it has anything like that, uh, if the song has a specific, how do I phrase this? um,
Significance?
yeah, or like what the tone of the song is supposed to be. Um, Sometimes you want to include like this is a really sad song that is often sung in these situations, or this poem represents this concept or theme. And again, that's stuff you will verbalize before you perform it, but it's nice to kind of go into the bardic with some of that background information.
And part of that's just to know whether or not you're pulling off your performance well. Like if you tell me like this is a drinking song and yet you kind of just monotone your way through it, like I'm like, well, you didn't actually pull off the like kind of boisterous sound I would expect from a drinking song, and so in that way you didn't do a great job with your performance. Like you may have memorized the words just fine, but maybe you had stage fright and you were really worried about your, you know, the whole doing it in front of live judges, and you didn't actually manage to pull off the tone of the song well. And maybe you stayed on key, but I need some emotion from it. And so like telling me ahead of time that, you know, this is a funeral song or a drinking song or a celebratory song of some sort, that lets me know what mood I should be expecting from you, to give me more context in case I'm not familiar with the song.
Also, if you wrote the song or poem or whatever it is, versus if you got it from another source. Because, you know, I like to give extra points to something that you've written yourself because, again, that's more effort that you're putting into it.
If it's an excerpt of a larger piece, that's also something like we've seen parts of plays or whatever put into the entry. So you want to be able to set the scene, like where you're coming into the scene, if it's a larger piece.
Bottle, I saw you have a question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Can do.
Yep.
Okay. Originally I was thinking about adding a shield cover in there, but looking at it over, I'm not sure it would be up. It would be up to that level to put it in. But I was thinking I'm working on a cloak that I'm making right now. Um, sorry. And I was just reading the Corpora for the writing part I was actually interested in for sort of a persona write up, I believe it was. Um, it seems like I believe I'd have to put it in a week, submit it about a week before, I guess, for approval.
Yeah, that's so. They tend to do writing entries ahead of time so that the judges can read them at their own leisure and not have to read them like at sight in the middle of like a judging all day. There's a lot of brain drain that happens, and people tend to not give writing the attention it tends to be due if it's all put there in the day of, just because like it's a lot of work. So yeah, judges like to do the writing entries ahead of the competition.
Okay, and I'm sorry, and for
noisy.
entering, oops, sorry.
It's also very noisy usually at our event sites, and so reading and being able to concentrate on things is difficult.
that makes sense. For entering a sword, uh, I guess it would be like the construction materials that were used, and for for the cover as well. But for something like sewing stuff or for making a cloak, would you have to add in the type of thread used or the type of stitches that are being used?
You don't have to specifically put in the type of thread. I feel like if you want to specify the difference between like using a cotton thread or a nylon thread or a polyester thread, you can. That part's getting a little nitpicky. Um, Typically, the most important materials you want to include are the fabric types. So if you're using, a fleece, felt, cotton, polyester, whatever, that that gives a little more information for that. And then yeah, definitely with the techniques. So if you're using a flat felled seam or a French seam or just a basic like rolled hem, like you want to include that information as well. Um, it
To put, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it, Nyrene.
Like to put in perspective, as far as thread goes, like maybe I wouldn't normally say what thread it is, but for cloaks, a lot of times they'll have a cloak clasp at the neck, and maybe I would specifically say that I used heavy duty thread for the cloak clasp to make it more likely that the thread wouldn't be the breaking point, or maybe I use heavy duty thread to attach the hood onto it because that is another high stress point on a cloak. So you think places where you would do something out of the ordinary that you might not has necessarily have thought of as a newer garber, those would be the points where you would make a point of pointing out that, hey, I did this thing that is special about this, instead of just continuing on with using normal sewing thread.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that because I think I just have the cone, I guess the cone thread, but I didn't actually make the hood for it yet. I just basically did the cloak for it right now. So I don't know if that would be a good heavy duty thread for that. And I also got a piece of leather that I'm probably going to end up having to hand stitch onto there because I don't want to break a needle or anything, which is something I've not done before, but I'm excited to try. I have
And
a leather kit here that also included some wax thread in there.
see, that would be a good piece of information to include in your write up if you ended up doing any hand sewing um, in that area. So, um, did you have any other questions, Bottle, before I move on to Chef Lawrence?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Alrighty, Chef Lawrence, what is your question? Oh wait, did he? Nope. Wait. Hmm?
Oh, he posted in the chat.
I see.
Uh, for a food item and recipe, what level beginner home cook, veteran industry cook, or grandma to be details in the write up? I mean, I'll take the first shot at this one. It depends on the complexity of the piece, and this is one of those like tailor your write ups. If if you're expecting this to be like a very complex, very like high scoring entry, you're going to be adding more of those details. If it's grandma level complexity and like work that you put into this entry, you're going to have more details in your write up versus like brownie mix out of a box.
Don't want to see brownie mix out of the box.
Um,
Don't enter brownie mix in a box.
yeah, that's also usually a good one to do to recognize is don't just do brownie mix in a box. Um, did that answer your question? Hopefully. Sorta. Anything else any more detail you want to us to kind of go over then? All right. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Bob, what is your question?
What is the creation age limitation, or is there one? And this is actually something that came up at our park, at our Crown Quals 2 weeks ago. The person decided last minute to go ahead and run for champion and had some things that he had made, but they had been made, a while ago, never entered for anything. We went ahead and said, no, we need somebody to be champion, so please enter them. But especially at a kingdom level event such as this, what would that quantify as?
The old closet clean out.
In our kingdom, we do not have a cutoff as long as it hasn't been entered. So we have basically you can enter it in a local and in every single level of park and kingdom, and both Qualls and Dragon Master, and we don't have a cutoff as far as how long ago you made it. Other kingdoms do, but we don't in Polaris. So you can pull it out from 30, 40 years ago and we don't care. Presumably your skills as an artist may have matured since then, and you may want to consider that when doing that, but we don't care how long it is, and you probably don't want to put that in your write-up. You just want to enter it and see how it does, but we don't have it has to be within the last year or any of that sort of thing. As long as it hasn't been entered before at the level you're entering it currently, it doesn't matter to us.
I know I've definitely entered a wooden cabinet I made in high school. It's like 6 years ago, so it's been a while. And I've had some other people enter. Typically, I've noticed it tends to be more construction pieces that get entered that were made quite a while ago because they tend to hold up very well. But yeah, there's no cutoff. More frequently, you will see people entering items they've made within the last 6 months to a year, though. But if you needed a champion and they had items to enter that they hadn't entered before, they were perfectly legal.
Thank you.
Yeah. McNichols, what is your question?
Yeah, I think it's especially relevant coming from, or to know what you guys feel since you're all garbers. But for worn items like belts or accessories or garb, how important do you think it is that the item hasn't been used before?
As a judge, it's not as important that it not be used so much as it not smell like it's been used.
Be damaged.
Yeah. If you've cleaned it up, ironed it, made it look nice enough again. I do not want you walking off the field, just pulling off your tunic and laying it down on the table. I'm not going to judge it well.
I know that I've entered items in before that I had given as gifts, or I had made for people, and they've worn for about a year before I ended up pulling them to have them judged. And at that point, they did have some wear and tear on them. Some of the applique might have been a little rougher than the pristine first day that I had made it. And that usually does get judged a little harsher because you're entering it as is. A judge can't look at it and say, or they can't really look at it and decide what it used to look like. They have to look at it and judge it as it is. So as long as you can, like Nyreen said, still, wash it, iron it, make it look nice, that's going to help. But if you do notice there's some fraying, or maybe the person was really rough with it and it has some grass stains or a hole in it, those will probably take away from the overall score.
However, if your tunic that someone's been wearing for 2 years still looks pristine, that's a point in your favor. Obviously you made a real good tunic.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
I would add that information to your write-up that it has been worn for what length of time or whatever. That's pertinent information and useful.
All right, just double checking. No other questions?
Sorry, I had a question.
Go for it.
I'm gonna go in the other room. Sorry, my question was for people doing Bardic, is it just the power of your own voice, or is it also or are there like mics, or is it just, as you as is?
It's you.
Cool.
You may accompany yourself or not on an instrument if you wish.
I believe I've also seen some ensembles done before. I've also seen people have like a backup, like an accompaniment of somebody singing or not singing, somebody playing an instrument for you, but you are the person being judged in that instance, unless they're also entering that like their performance as well. Depending on the site you're at, sometimes there are opportunities to get a microphone or speakers or music like that, but typically with our locations, it is the power of your voice.
This is perfect. It's just I know sometimes when you're in the middle of a field, it's hard to hear people sing. So I was just wondering.
Definitely.
Thank you.
They tend to line up like 5 seats, like 5 feet in front of you, and get front row seats to you. So
I know we do have some limitations with our Bardic performances as far as presentation goes, and I'm hoping that that's something that can change over time. And that could be something that we discuss a little bit more in our next class on presentation in an ANS competition. Any other questions related to write-ups?
I guess for something like food, I know you said the ingredients you would have to also put in there, but if you are adding, say, uh, like for me, for instance, I like spicy stuff. So say I added a hot sauce into whatever I'm making, or a pre-made spicy powder or something. Would I have to include the name of the sauce or the name of the powder as well as what's in the sauce or already in the powder? So like for sauce, it's a little different
Everything.
because they put in like all these different ingredients usually in the sauce itself. Whereas the powder, it's a little bit more basic. So
You should include everything that goes into it because of allergies, because you don't want somebody having an allergy attack because they're judging. If it's easier for you, you could bring the sauce or powder that you put in it and say like, and I also included some of this, and then they could look at it, the back of it themselves, if it seems easier than listing out all the ingredients that are straight from that sauce.
okay, so if I were to say get a picture, because some of the ones I have, the writing on the back's a little bit on the small side. So if I just were to print it out and maybe include it in the write-up, would that be okay?
Yeah, that would work too. Because then we would still be able to access the ingredients, even if you didn't bring the bottle in. That even if you didn't like type it up, just so long as we can see them. Because, like Nyreen said, allergies. Last thing we want is to have to call an ambulance.
Yeah, that would probably be a good idea.
Uh,
Thank you.
Hope, what was your question?
So this is kind of, I'm going to say, a retroactive question, learning how to do this better going forward, because I don't think I did it very well the first time. When an entry involves multiple contributors, how is that best handled? In the case of the particular entry that I put in, it was myself and another contributor. We both entered it. Like both our names were on the write-up. It honestly was fairly awkward because she did one section of it, I did another. We both wanted to enter our own sections, but when it's in a single item, kind of out of hand, and I would like to have more on doing that better in the.
In general, that isn't a thing we do because we want you to have made like 70 to 80% of the item, and it's hard to turn in an item that the second person would have presumably only made 30% of it, which makes it so they wouldn't be able to turn it in.
Yeah, I would say typically, unless you're able to separate the two pieces, it would be really difficult to enter an item together. So, for example, with a shield, for example, one person might have constructed the shield itself, all of the foam and leather or whatever have you, and then another person might have done the shield cover. You can separate those two. They still both fall under construction, but one, like, they're two separate pieces. But if it's an item that multiple people worked on together, it would be very difficult to really separate the components of that and then judge it accurately.
Okay, so to kind of, I guess, elaborate on the concept, how does a physical item that has more than one contributor, where you can't really separate the components, differ from a bardic performance with multiple contributors? I guess I'm kind of confused as to how contributors is explicitly in the categories, and a physical item this phase, so this phase, I recognize it's not common, which is why I'm asking the question.
For sure.
Because we have an ensemble category for Bardic, and basically you live and die all at the same score. You don't separate out your various contributions to it. You are being judged as a unit, and so like maybe one of you is a world-class opera singer and the other one is dragging the other one down, but you're going to get a score that's basically the average between you. And that's like if you choose to have a friend accompany you on guitar and you enter as an ensemble and they're a terrible guitar player, or maybe you're a terrible singer, whatever. I mean, I'm not making a particular thing, but like you're getting judged as a unit. We're not asking the judges to say, yeah, but the singing was good, right? It was the guitar that was pulling them down. We're saying, no, like, how was it as a whole performance? So we don't have that equivalent in the physical arts. We only have it in the bardics.
Okay. Is that something that, kind of looking forward, because I recognize that there is often revision that happens to I suppose it all is in the corpora. Is that something that is a possibility even? Just kind of, I'm exploring the idea here.
There has been like box competitions where they send the park a box, and then your park is to make as many like different crafts or whatever out of this contents of the box, and it's like a collaborative competition. But it is its own kind of competition that I've seen, and as one thing that's collaboration like that.
It would be something interesting because it is in our corpora and we can change our corpora. If you're able to write something up and submit it, there's a chance that we could change that. I was actually talking to Ophelia from Magmel, who is interested in entering some items that don't necessarily fit super well into our current designated categories. And not only them, but a few other people I've talked to also, especially nowadays, we're creating more things that don't necessarily fit into these somewhat narrow categories. And like an item that is created by multiple people, we may have to adjust our corpora. We may have to adjust the cultural categories to better fit the items that we are creating nowadays. So while it isn't currently something that we offer, it might be something that we offer in the future.
Yeah, the
Okay.
corpora rewrite was a major rewrite from our old categories. The intent was simply to make it so no one crafter had a giant advantage over another. Like Mittens being mainly a garber didn't have a huge advantage over Chef Lawrence being mainly a foodie. So like he would have the option of 3 different entries, and Mittens would have the option of 3 different entries in their comfort zone. And then they would have to branch out and do 2 other ones that were not necessarily in their comfort zone. And that was the intent with the Corpora categories rewrite. And we didn't really look into other other branches. So like we took out a lot of the weirder categories, like heraldry. Heraldry could fit in a lot of different places, but it allowed some overlap that was weird. Like garbers obviously can do heraldry easily, some other things less easily. So we took it out. We took out rose because it doesn't really give you a physical thing. But some of those other things that people might be asking about now might fit into those categories. It's just they're a little weirder as far as trying to balance the categories and not give any one type of crafter an advantage over another. And so that was our main focus when we were rewriting the categories, is trying not to let anyone have that heavy advantage over someone else.
I remember as a garber, I used to be able to enter 7 to 9 different categories.
And all be garb, yeah.
And all be garb.
Oh, those were the days.
Nick, I see you have a question.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
I do. Well, I'm not really sure how to word it as a question, and I showed up late, so this might have been brought up already.
Go for it.
But so when it comes to judging different A&S competitions and things like that, what's being done as far as, because I've noticed when someone is judging something that they don't make, or, and this isn't all the time, but it comes up where, let's say a garber is judging a painted mini or a written thing, they judge it a lot lower than everyone else. Is there something being done to kind of, I guess, judge more based on the thing itself that was made rather than the person's like opinion of the artist or the item? I'm not really wording that very well, but basically things will get judged wildly across the board based on someone's like, oh, I don't like poetry, so I'm gonna tank this score, that kind of thing. Whereas like somebody else is like, oh, this was written really well, and then the score is really high.
Yeah, I was gonna object to your saying they say it's really low just because it's not there. Because people will put it either really low or really high, and they just don't have a baseline to start with.
Yeah, a lot of new crafts that are foreign to the judge tend to score highly because they're more easily impressed by some of the creative stuff that they haven't seen before.
I found that in all of the write-ups I've ever gotten for Dragon Masters, it's very easy to tell when a judge has never like done any miniature painting whatsoever, because the feedback I get is always extremely worse than any judge who actually has a background or at least some knowledge in it.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what I mean is, and I've just experienced, not just myself, but other people as well, where they'll submit something. Is there a way to, I'm not really sure how to word it, but a way to kind of set a baseline for judging if you are a judge?
So it's something that's been a struggle for years, and something that a lot of regents and just artistically minded people in general have been working on. I know a handful of us have been working to set up rubrics, which kind of...
That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah. Rubrics, there are various kinds, overall ones, and then others that are more specific to individual crafts or categories, like the cultural categories. But even then, there's always some limitations depending on how much you know, because not every judge is going to be knowledgeable in every craft.
Sure.
Having one thing Nyreen had done previously, and something that I'm going to be doing as well, is finding judges that are knowledgeable in as many different things as possible. So if you come into judging and you know garbing, you know metalwork, and you know writing, those are those might be the things I'm going to have you judge versus somebody who's really good at painting and cooking, and maybe those are the only two things. So then they'll focus on those. But at the same time, it can also be hard to find enough judges then in that situation. For Polaricon coming up in December, my goal is to have not only knowledgeable judges, but to have all of the judges judging each piece at the same time, so that those who don't have as much knowledge or information about a certain skill can talk to the other judges that do have that.
Oh, okay. So they can kind of talk amongst themselves about
Yes.
the item. Okay.
So we
That's how we do Olympiad, and it's great. Or we did.
and that's also how I do Crimson Circles judging. So we, all four of us or all five of us, depending on how many judges you have, will start with item number 1, and it might be a sewing piece. Well, I know a lot about sewing, and judge number 2 knows nothing about sewing. So I'm going to point out, like, this is the material they used. These are the seams they used. Look over here. They missed folding this part in, so that's a frayed hem right there. And, oh, they didn't do this part, but they did do this, So I'll kind of go through it a little bit with them just to give them that knowledge and point out things they might miss. I know Nyrene, for example, is a great resource for me when it comes to mini painting, because she does a ton with it, and I don't. I've painted one mini, and I have lots of friends who paint minis, but I
That's
myself
why
don't have that
I
skill.
don't enter mini painting in kingdom level Dragon Masters. So I'm like, nope, I'm just gonna
It's very
keep it.
it's very challenging.
I'm gonna keep a little
It
hobby.
is why I've given up on doing Dragon Masters.
I'm just gonna keep.
I stopped submitting to them altogether a year and a half ago because of this exact problem.
I think the big thing for me is my talents lay outside of what is normally considered popular. Like, I'm not a garber. I don't make weapons. I paint. I write. I sort of draw. Kind of. And I guess it's just generally judged lower. That doesn't disappoint me. I was just wondering, kind of. You answered my question really well, because I've run into that problem where scores are kind of all over the place based on judge understanding of what they're looking at. So
Yeah.
I think a rubric is a good idea.
Yeah, a combination of rubric, qualified judges, and discussing the pieces one at a time as a group, I think is probably the best way we can kind of combat that lack of knowledge and poor judging as a result. And another thing too, for those who are a little concerned about entering Dragon Master or any sort of cultural competition, it can be very disheartening to get back scores that aren't as high as you would anticipate, or maybe you get feedback that you're not very fond of. And if you enjoy doing that art or that craft or that hobby, whatever the case may be, if you enjoy doing it and you know that entering a competition is just going to make you feel bad about it and not want to do it, I would say you should focus on what makes you happiest. I know that I also don't win Dragon Masters like Kingdom level. I've never won a Kingdom level Dragon Master because I know that I enjoy doing my craft. I feel like I'm good at it, but it just tends not to judge very highly. And I'm also just not skilled in enough, like my skills aren't diverse enough to hit enough categories at a high enough level to ever win Dragon Master. And so for some people, it's easier for me to just do the thing outside of competitions, and that way I can still enjoy it.
I'll add don't particularly pay attention to the number of the score.
Yes.
The judging itself is more about putting things in order and by how much. And the size of the competition means we have to use more of those bins. To put everything in the correct order. So it might not be a score that you were hoping for, but look at the order is the most important part.
Well,
Yeah, a lot of people
in the future, I'd
focus on those.
also I'd also recommend, at least for if you're in charge of like setting up judges, there have been some times where I myself or other people have gotten, I don't want to say cruel, but the feedback is kind of mean-spirited. And it's like, okay, I get you didn't like the thing, but you didn't have to tear me in half. You know what I mean?
I'm not sure what feedback you've gotten, but I know I, as a judge, often feel like I'm being mean to people, and I'm not trying to be. Like what I'm trying to do is give feedback for you to improve. I don't think I've judged any of your stuff, so I don't think it was me, but
I don't believe so. No.
But like in general, I'm trying to say, like, I think it's great that you're doing this craft, and I don't want you to quit, but I'm trying to figure out how to say that while also saying, but here are all the ways you can improve the thing you did. Yeah. So it's hard. It's a hard line to walk as a judge of saying, please don't stop crafting, but here are all the ways I see that you could improve this, and please try to take this the way I intend it. And that is such a hard tone to get when you're not telling somebody in person when you're writing it down, because they're seeing it afterwards, and they didn't win the competition, and they're all kind of a little upset about it, because you put yourself out there, you put out those things that you thought you did a good job on, you spent some time on, and you got all this, presumably some negative feedback back about it, and you're upset about it. And I understand that. Like I've been there myself. I got some comments that were what I thought really stupid and uninformed back about some of my work I turned in early, and it's like, obviously those judges didn't know what they were talking about, and I get that, I understand that, but like in general, I know I, as a judge, I'm never trying to be mean, even if I am looking at your project being like, why was this turned in as a Dragon Master? Ugh! So I'm trying to give feedback to encourage you to make your stuff better for the next Dragon Master. Like, to say, don't quit, but you're not going to win this one, but maybe the next one, maybe the one after that,
Yeah. And it also, I've experienced it with other people. It's also, I don't take bad criticism well. Like, yeah, if my thing wasn't great, cool. But sometimes you get comments where you're just like, oh, you didn't have to say it like that. That's okay. But cool. Thank you for answering my questions. That's a load off my mind, actually. So.
Sure. I would say another thing too is if you have something that you've made and you're proud of, even if you don't think you're going to win Dragon Master, I do love seeing those things. I do love seeing your work, and I think it's important to present it to the world, because there are some people who make so many things, but then nobody gets to see it. And if you want to get recognized for it, if you've made something and you're at a third owl and you place that in Dragon Master, you might not win Dragon Master, but you might get your fourth owl. You might get that quality feedback that will help you improve for the next time. So don't necessarily enter a Dragon Master expecting to win that Dragon Master, because there's often really steep competition in them. But if you are entering that Dragon Master thinking, I'm going to get quality feedback, I'm going to get my item viewed by judges, by people who may end up giving me an award for it, or I'm entering that Dragon Master to get over that anxiety of entering a competition, because that too can be very intimidating, especially at a kingdom level. Like, I know it took me a couple years before I felt confident enough just to enter at a kingdom level, because I didn't think my work was good enough. Just getting that exposure can make it easier for the next time and the time after that. Like, when you're entering Dragon Master, it's not a one and done. Hopefully, at least, it inspires you to want to do more, improve your skills, and enter more Dragon Masters.
Well, and I've never approached a Dragon Master with the intent to win. The example I use a lot is I turned in some stuff and Jason forged a knife. So, and like, not just, it's like a common kitchen knife. It was like a fancy dagger with a handle that he made. And I went, oh yeah, that's, okay, cool. So, but thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Were there any other questions?
Billy asked where the sign-in is.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Zyke, are we getting credit for this? I came into this class assuming we were just having a fun class.
I'm all for if you want to take attendance, giving out credits for this class.
I mean, we have almost 20 people. That alone is just good for the numbers, right?
Well, we had over 20 people for a while. And that's also my concern, is we did have some people leave.
Oh, yeah, so we are going to miss some attendance on there. Well,
they should have asked sooner.
Did McNichols'
I was gonna,
class have...
No, I don't think we took attendance for McNichol's class last week. We should probably start taking attendance for these though, just because. I mean, if they're scheduled, they meet the criteria for online meetings according to our corpora, so we might as well be giving credits for this.
Cool. Where would be the best place to enter them?
Take a list of them and forward it to Kismet and make him enter it.
Alrighty. I'm going to end the recording, and then we can take attendance. So, for the sake of the record, thank you everybody for attending the class. I'm going to end the recording, but don't go anywhere because we want to get attendance.